So what do you need to know about a compass? The circular step is very similar to the side steps, so similar in fact that sometimes, well, people perform them so seamlessly that certain movements you could do with a step can also be done here. You can either just move your leg, or you can already start a prepared combination and make this kind of circular movement. And what you get is this kind of circular side step. So there's nothing wrong with that, in fact, it's actually a very good habit. And if you reach the point where you do it automatically without thinking and execute it so deliberately, well, that's a really valuable and serious skill. First of all, a side step is always a step to the side with a strike. So if you just move to the side, that's simply a movement to the side. The main principle and secret is to instantly step back while landing a precise strike. The circus, the compass, has a slightly different task. One of the main things in the circular movement is to pull away from your opponent, but not more than necessary. So it's considered a very clever maneuver. In other words, it's a preparatory base for a strike. Of course, you can also do it by shifting back just a little and striking with the same side leg, adding a twist. The first things, just as my coach always taught me, are really like this. Now, just try to picture this, imagine, if you will, that a nail has been hammered through your big toe and your foot can only move as if it's tied to the floor. And the most important thing for moving comfortably and efficiently is to use this compass-like motion correctly, shifting your body weight, because you could do it like this. But as you can see, you really can't do it that way, because that's actually a very long phase. You absolutely have to make sure to start it with the balls of your feet. So everything starts from here, because the distance I need in a fight might require a short retreat, or on the contrary, an advance with the same side foot. And all of these things I have to do as if my foot is really screwed in place without taking any steps. That is, gradually, when you unwind one leg, the one in front, it could be either the left or the right. In other words, the principle remains the same whether it's on one leg or the other. But until you develop this form for yourself, so that you can quickly do certain things, like a compass, turning around. So come at me from this side. The point is, you see, as the pressure starts, I can pivot. And while pivoting, I can immediately attack. That's why coaches often insist, if you're doing a pivot, they literally require that when you strike, say with your right leg, you throw a left punch. As soon as the movement starts, I begin the attack, right? But to avoid getting stuck, you shouldn't throw your leg too far back. It needs to go strictly in the direction where your other hand is applying pressure. One strike, and the second follows immediately. That is, as soon as your foot stops, that's already a different phase, and you shift your pivot entirely onto the front leg. Why is this done?
Weight transfer.
Transferring your body weight is a fundamental movement in many techniques. On the other hand, I have developed an entire set of strikes that are specifically based on this principle, and they are all closely tied to this simple little step which serves as the foundation for executing them effectively. Moreover, here I can also incorporate the second of the preparatory exercises, where your front leg can move while the back leg, according to the same principle, stays anchored. And with these careful and deliberate steps, you determine and calculate the trajectory of your strikes so that from any point of support, you can use either hand with precision. And these movements, essentially, are practiced very, very slowly. In other words, you can't just pick them up out of nowhere without understanding them. If you simply try to do this movement, I don't know, you'll get used to it very quickly. But how is it actually used at the moment of striking? What is the positioning? That's already a matter of calculation in a fight. That's why this exercise is done as a form of gymnastics for beginners, nothing more. So that later in a fight, you can calculate how you can twist, easily move to the side, either to one side or the other, and up off to the side, in order to let your main brute force slip through. It's more of a maneuver, but a very tricky one, because this maneuver forms the basis for a lot of possibilities. And if you are well trained on the back system for your striking technique, understanding how you can strike from a lift, from a turn, from a drop. It's also very interesting to use this element with a step. So the first part is when you do it from a stationary position, and the second is how you do it with a step. For example, you can do a side step like this. Well, you get the idea, right? You can also throw it in there. Let me repeat that again. So don't get confused. Now look, you can also do a pivot the same way. For example, if your opponent is pressing you and you don't have time, you take a step and turn. The most common one, well, for some reason, I'm taking the side step here. Because when you take a step, your weight shifts so quickly that you barely even notice it. That's why you pull back a little, then turn to change direction, to create a path that benefits only you, so that it forces your opponent to turn as well. As soon as your opponent turns, you use the same technique, not twisting off somewhere in an unknown direction, but just rotating slightly, creating discomfort for your opponent, pulling them out, turning them into an awkward position. Here, I can twist a little more if I need to. On one hand, I'm increasing the distance, but on the other hand, I'm keeping you within striking range. It's very difficult. If, for example, the pressure starts, I take a step in this direction, take a step and adjust a little. So it's not like those circular movements you see in the preparatory drills. There, you have all sorts of things, some crazy ones, little walking drills, and so on. Those are very good exercises. They really help you develop your movement coordination overall. That's why the compass step is also usually introduced in the second year of training. In other words, it's really not for beginners. It's for those who have already realized that they're just standing like posts. So they can do this kind of thing. But to do the same thing with your legs, how easy is it to perform this compass step? No matter how you look at it, it's just a step to the side. You can also twist the compass step forward on the same side, or you can immediately deliver and strike from the left. And there isn't really a strict rule if you're pushing fighting. Of course, it's an obvious movement. The inertia carries you out, and here you're already striking. So you don't have to do anything right away. That's why this is another similarity with the compass step. The fact is, you can unexpectedly turn this movement into a strike-like. As soon as the pressure on you starts, you step to the side and twist. What are you going to do now? Yes, at that moment, you'll still be getting hit while you're turning around, even though you did everything right. I also twist in this direction, starting to hit you right away. And here, I keep an eye on even your slightest movement in this direction. If you do, I strike with full force. In other words, you end up running right into the strike yourself. And if you make the maneuver itself quickly, then these circular moves, they're a really effective thing. But you really need to practice it. There are a lot of variations when it comes to circular movement. There's a quarter turn, 3/4, a half circle, or a full circle. But in a fight, it's used in a completely different way. So if you're only used to doing it like in gymnastics, that's great. You've already acquired the skill, but you need to integrate this skill into your fighting technique so that it naturally comes together with an understanding of how you'll strike if needed, how you'll defend, how you'll adjust your movement. And all of this needs to be really, really well developed. That's why these kinds of models, which are made for explanation, are really just meant to motivate you, including motivating you to start working seriously with equipment. And if you truly understand how you can actually do it like this in the air, then you should try to integrate it by practicing on a punching bag, consciously and deliberately twisting your foot, making sure to pay attention to your movement. I've reached a point where it's already intuitive like. Even with my eyes closed, I know exactly where I need to pivot so that my lines of strike align perfectly. No matter how I move or where I strike, if one punch lands, then all of them will land. You just need to know how to do it and choose the right situation yourself. Of course, you can also use a slight twister feint from close range very effectively when attacking, as it can catch your opponent off guard and create an opening. By showing that you came here, you make them believe you will attack from this direction, but you can actually do it here, surprising them with your move. You draw your opponent out, come here. And here, you make a completely different move. This is called drawing in. When you see that your opponent is open, you might recall a stationary punching bag, not realizing at all that besides the bag's movement, there's also an incredible speed that you yourself apply to that bag. So these two things, they already start to clash in your mind. Why does it happen like this? There's theory, there's practice, there's your theory, and there's your practice. That's the gold you're already squeezing out. That's why circling sidesteps there kind of, as people say, the second level. In other words, a lot of strategies are connected to this. It's very interesting. But this needs to be developed. There's also one thing that was invented long ago. This exists in every boxing gym. If it's not there, you can just put it on the floor, like in the shape of a cross. See? It's also specifically for practicing circling. With this system, if you learn it well, if you just get used to it, understand the principle itself. That's already, when you've been in a fight and you understand the sides themselves, you take a step along the line, the opponent applies pressure, you pivot, you can turn up to the line or up to here or up to here. Again, you take a step and pivot. The movement is fast, like a gliding or hovering move. But the movement itself is fast. You can also return here, one, and then suddenly you go forward with a punch just like a tightly coiled spring, a quick, sharp movement. One. There are a lot of algorithms here. The more you work on these systems, even just to, unwind a bit, it's all simple. But the skill gets reinforced, and in a fight you're already looking for a spot with your foot to pull off some kind of feint. You lure, you pull back sharply, you spin. The same side strike is based on the compass move. The compass, I'll say it again. In a fight it changes so much that even a turn like this is already a lot. Under pressure, yes, you can throw your opponent off, you can take another step back. Step again, turn, step again, turn, do it all at once, quickly turn your legs. Well, you can't spin, but it makes it easier to maneuver in front of your opponent. Easier than like this. Well, in a way. So when you get tired of jumping, you can just protect yourself with these compass-like movements and steps. That's why I say this is still just the very beginning. That's when this geometry starts, when your legs are already well trained and you start to find it interesting yourself. The transfer of body weight becomes so precise that your whole body manages to move in sync, whether it's for a strike or, if needed, for defense. Everything is built on the same foundations. So guys, give it a try. We'll try to give a broader overview of the pivot and the sidestep. In other words, we'll try to show the charm and beauty that boxing loses because of these kinds of maneuvers, because of these kinds of counter techniques. So stay tuned, there's more to come.